Let me say a word about the Steelworkers Union, which I'm sure most people know a little bit about, but give you a few facts which will help to contextualize my remarks. The Steelworkers have about 800,000 members. Roughly 85% of our members are in private sector manufacturing. We're the largest union in the steel industry, the aluminum industry, the paper industry, glass, tire, mining other than coal, oil and chemical. Essentially, other than actually assembling a car or a plane, if something is mined or made in America, steelworkers are likely to be doing it in one form or another. We have over 7,000 different collective bargaining agreements with about 5,000 employers, some large, most small. So we really sit at ground zero of the manufacturing economy, and there's really no part of the manufacturing economy and its health that doesn't affect us. And for that reason, we are deeply and profoundly committed to there being a vital, healthy private sector manufacturing economy. The union understands that we do live in a global economy, and so the competitiveness of our employers is very important to us. We like to think we have good collective bargaining agreements. We like to think we have the best, but we certainly work very hard at it, and we, with no shame, try very hard to have our members be well paid and to be well protected when they're at work. But in order for that to work over the long term, the companies that employ our members need to make profits and be competitive, because in the end, the only true job security for a private sector employee is the long-term profitability and competitiveness of their employer. When we think about this public investment problem, we think about it in many ways, but I want to focus this morning on this competitiveness issue. Bob has spoken, and Eric and others have spoken, and I think we'll hear more about what public investment gets you in terms of the jobs directly created by the man or woman who makes the concrete or pours the concrete, et cetera, by the restaurant worker who serves them when they go out to dinner. But I want to talk about the role of the bridge in the manufacturing economy after it's built. Because in the end, I think that is really, for us anyway, as union folks, that is really the lasting defense of public investment and why we think it's so absolutely critical. Let me give you a very simplified but I think helpful framework to think about a manufacturing process. What happens in manufacturing? You start by taking something out of the ground. You start with a raw material. It could be coal, it could be iron ore, it could be alumina, it could be rubber. You take something out of the ground. You then move it somewhere. And where you move it to is traditionally called, let's call it a factory. You might know it as a mill, you might know it as another title, but let's call it a factory. So you take this thing you get out of the ground and you transport it to a place that we'll call the factory. Inside that factory, you put labor against that raw material, and you put energy against that raw material, and you put capital in the form of machinery against that raw material. And with those three inputs, you transform that raw material into another state. Either you chemically alter it, more likely you physically alter it. When you're finished doing that, you then transport it again. Either you transport it to another place that does further manufacturing to it, or you transport it directly to some place where it's sold to a consumer. So in very oversimplified terms, that is the manufacturing process. Now let's zero in on that manufacturing process and look at each of those steps. The raw material is essentially the product of God. Iron ore is a certain richness in northern Minnesota, and it's not as rich in southern Illinois. And there's more coal in southern Illinois than there is in New York City. And so the location of raw materials is really something that is God-given, and there's not much that government or anyone else can really do about that. But once you get the raw material out of the ground, as I said, you got to get it somewhere. And so now we have an infrastructure issue. which is we have the question of how you transport it. And the key issue from a business competitive perspective is how much time it takes to get the raw material from where you found it to where you're going to work on it in your factory. Because all of those factors that I talked about earlier are really just the agglomeration of the cost to make whatever it is you're manufacturing. And as I said earlier, we stand without apology for the principle of paying people well. Well, if you want to pay people well, then you've got to have the other factors of production be manageable and be in the aggregate competitive. So we go get the raw material, and it is what it is. We can't do much about that. But how much it costs us to get it from where we find it to where we try to transform it is a question of public infrastructure. So we move it on a road, we move it on a rail, we take it through an airport. Some way or other we have to move it. And so the question of what kind of transportation infrastructure we have as a nation is central to the cost of manufacturing at that stage of the process. Because if we can't move it from where we find it to where we transform it efficiently, i.e. at low cost, then we are less competitive as a nation in terms of our ability to produce the final product on a cost competitive basis. Well, now we've got it in the factory, and we put labor against it, and we put capital against it. Well, the cost of capital is another matter that we could have a whole separate seminar on, but let's leave that dicey question aside for a minute. But certainly the labor we put against it, as I said, we think the labor ought to be well paid. Well, if the labor is going to be well paid, the labor needs to be productive. How is the labor productive? It's productive, one, if it works with advanced machinery. So that's really capital. So the business needs capital. But the labor is also productive if it's skilled. And so our education infrastructure produces the skill base of the workforce that can manipulate the machinery to transform the raw material. And so if we have an efficient education system, efficient defined as producing skilled labor, then we can pay labor more than we would if we otherwise didn't. In addition, and let me just divert for a sec, one of the other activities the business has to accomplish is it has to be able to internally communicate with itself. So it has to be able to telephone the other operations, it has to be able to video conference, it has to be able to go onto the computers, onto the internet. Well, all of those are infrastructure matters too. All of those are infrastructure matters too. So if we have a viable communications infrastructure, then the business can operate more competitively. I then said we had to put energy against this raw material because you have to, in most manufacturing processes, you have to transform it. Either you have to make the machine work with electricity or some other fuel, or you have to actually apply natural gas or some other item that is going to allow you to physically and chemically transform the raw material. Well, the cost of energy is centrally a question of infrastructure as well. Again, some of energy costs are based on what they are, i.e. how much coal we have, how much oil we have, etc. But a huge part of the cost of energy is moving the energy. So if we have a smart grid and we have a well-developed grid, we can move electricity without losing the amount of electricity that we move when we move it. So we can get electricity from where it is made to where it is needed. And so, again, we've talked before about the green economy. If we want to make electricity, as we should want to, in ways with renewable sources, it works out that most of the places where we can generate renewable power are not places where we need the power. So we need to move the power from where we get it, and that could be a traditional coal-fired plant, but it could also be a windmill factory or a solar factory. Whatever it was, we got to get it from there to the factory that is making the thing, whatever it is we're talking about. So an efficient energy structure, an efficient energy grid, is again central to whether or not the manufacturing is cost competitive. The fundamental cost of power, and electricity is the most common one, but the fundamental cost of power is an infrastructure question. Because if we have a lot of windmills, and we have a lot of solar cells, and we have a lot of investment in those things, then we will have lower cost power. And again, this is consistent with the broad fact that we have to save our planet, and we have to do it without putting a lot of carbon in the air. But however we do it, we've got to do it cost effectively if we're going to make the cost of power affordable to those who are doing the manufacturing exercise. And then the final step is we have whatever it is we have at the factory, and we got to take it someplace else. Either we have to take it to another factory that's going to do something else to it, or we have to take it to a place where a consumer can come and buy it. And again, that is a transportation question. And so if the road is full of potholes, and the truck driver spends more time repairing his truck than he does driving the material, if the airport is crowded and congested, and the item has to wait in a long line to get from where it needs to go, from where it's coming to where it needs to go, if the port can't accommodate modern traffic, whatever it is that you want to do to move the thing from where you make it to where you either do more to it or sell it, that is a transportation infrastructure question. So all of those things mean to us that the public investment, whether they be in the hard assets of what I'll call infrastructure or the soft assets of education, are fundamental to creating a competitive environment for people to provide private sector employment. And again, we make no apology for demanding that our workers be well paid. That is both morally right, and it is the right way, we believe, to organize an economy. And we make no apology for asking that the corporations that employ our members be responsible. They be responsible to the environment. They be responsible in terms of the pollutants they put in the air. They be responsible for maintaining a safe workplace. No one should have to be hurt when they work. So we impose, and we should impose, either as a society or as a union in unionized environments, we impose costs on the employer in terms of the actual cost of labor and the other costs associated with manufacturing, so it's done in a responsible way. And those are the right things to do. But if we're going to do those things, and then we're going to want people to make stuff here in America, then we have to provide the fertile ground on which they can make things. The only other strategy is a low-road strategy of low wages and no protections. And we've seen that strategy. It's a failure. We can never compete as a nation with that strategy. We will only be in a race to the bottom, and obviously there's only one result of a race to the bottom, and that is that you lose. So the race to the top, which is the race that works for all of us, is a race that's based on having a vibrant and vital public investment strategy. Thank you.